Hello YouTube, my name's Rob Pollard. I'm the developer for Sojour. This is a video to talk about the 1.6 release. Now, that's a release that's it's had a lot of work done, but you're not going to see much of it, unfortunately. It's all background technical work, and most of that work was focused on making Sojour work well with cloud drives. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a high-level presentation as to what problems cloud drives create and how I've resolved them. And once I've done that, I'll show the latest version of Sojour. So in the olden days, before people were using the cloud a lot, you'd have Sojour and you'd have its data and its folders, and if Sojour wanted to write to it, it could, and you know, it was great. And that's because Sojour owned those files. However, late 2025, early 2026, Microsoft started pushing people onto the cloud, especially in Windows 11. And the end result is that most people's documents folder is actually now on OneDrive, and some of you might not know that. And that presents problems for Sojour because Sojour's default directory for saving data is in documents as recommended by the specifications. So I guess the big question is, what is the problem? What is the cloud doing? So basically, I've had a few reports from customers saying they're trying out things, either deleting something or altering something, and Sojour just crash out on them. And whenever I looked at the logs, nearly always it was OneDrive, and I think on one occasion Google Drive that was causing them problems. So why is there a problem? Well, it's down to the way the filing system works. So if you can imagine, this is Sojour's data directory and it's on the cloud. What cloud systems tend to do is they tend to operate on that data, like for instance file synchronization, or maybe checking the version and so forth. And when it's doing that, it puts a lock on the files that it's working on. And that's I guess an intrinsic part of how Windows works. Generally speaking, if an app is going to work on a file, it tends to put a lock on it, and the cloud is no different in that respect. Now the problem is Sojour has no idea that it's locked by something else. Sojour is always coded along the lines of, my data, I'm in charge of it. So when you hit save, you try to save it, but the file's already locked by the cloud, and the operating system then throws a big exception and everything explodes. And basically the operating system is telling Sojour, unauthorized access, you do not have any right at all to your own files. And that's because the cloud had already locked it. So yeah, really big problem, and one that I decided to make a priority to fix. So how did I fix it? That's what I'm going to show you now. And it is a lot more complex than just saving a file. So the way it's fixed is, now as a user, if you click save or you'll make any modification, instead of talking to your data folder, it initially puts your data into a local folder. And the folder it uses is guaranteed to be local as well, and that's because within Windows, under your user profile, there's a folder called app data, and app data is hidden by default. You might need to show hidden files, and under app data I think there are three directories. There's local, local low, and roaming, and we're using the local folder, and that local folder is guaranteed by the Windows specification to always be local. That's why it's called local, and because of that I can create Sojour directories within local, and they're guaranteed to be owned just by Sojour, so any kind of file operation here is perfectly safe. So Sojour writes the data there because it needs to store it somewhere safe, but then you end up with a problem. You got your data directory on the cloud, and you now have a separate local directory, and ideally this data here needs to be on the cloud. So Sojour has a mechanism to automatically move this data across. So the first part of the mechanism is it's like a directory watcher, and what that does, I think in Sojour it's actually called the file sync detector. I think that's the official name. And what that does, it monitors Sojour's local folder for changes, and if it detects any changes, its job is to create a job on Sojour's internal queue of work, and that's what it does. So if you can imagine in this case, you hit save, you create a file that goes into local, this detects it, it sees what subdirectory it's in, and then it creates a worker item, which is, I want you at some point in the future to take this file and its subdirectories and move the whole thing into the data folder. Once it's moved into the data folder, the idea being that you remove the job from the queue. So there's one more piece to this puzzle, and that is, I guess you can call it the synchronization manager. I think Sojour calls it the synchronization worker because it's essentially a worker thread. So this is a background thread. It looks at the queue for outstanding jobs, takes a job off the queue, reads it, and then attempts to action that job. So in this case, we saved this file here into local. There's a job in here to say take what's in local and move it. It tries to do that. Now in this case, it's still locked. The cloud's still doing stuff with the file in question, so that will explode as well. The only difference is that this system is designed to handle those errors, and what it does, it will then attempt a further 5 times to get this data transferred across, and each time it's waiting just a little bit longer to give the cloud a little bit longer to unlock it. Now if it gets to the 6th attempt and it still is unsuccessful, it takes that job and re-queues it. It gets put back on the queue for use later on down the line. And this is how you get your robustness, insofar as if something's not available because the cloud has it, it just goes back on the queue and Sojour will try again later on. So it's a pretty robust system in that regard. And of course, ultimately at some point the cloud will take its lock off because it's finished doing what it's doing. This job will come off the queue, it will then try to move this across, and this time it succeeds, and then the job gets taken off of the queue. And that's how the system works. And this whole thing is asynchronous in the background, so you probably won't even know it's going on. Though I have added logs to Sojour, so you can actually see what's happening. Okay, so let's run up Sojour and see if we can spot any differences. So the first difference is that splash screen, and that's there because in the past, with the older system, it would load and save data in the same thread, i.e. on the same CPU core. And because of that, whenever it loaded, the user interface would just stop updating. And normally that's a bad thing, but in this case it's a good thing, because what it meant was all the different parts of Sojour could load up, and once they finished loading, control would be given back to Windows itself, everything would update, and then it looked like everything loaded at once. Now the problem with the new system, because it's asynchronous and working on a different CPU core, what I noticed is you see the individual parts load up as their threads finished, and it just looked odd and a little bit unprofessional. So I thought, in order to hide that, I put that splash screen up, and then that way all that stuff would happen in the background, and then once it's done, the splash screen will be hidden, and then you'd see everything appear on Sojour at once. So yeah, it just makes things look a little bit more professional, I guess. Another big change was to Sojour's rendering loop. So for those who don't know, Sojour uses its own custom graphics engine called Ionian, which I originally wrote for Ancient Armies, which is something else I'm writing. And Ionian's job, what makes it a little bit, I guess, unique, is it's specially designed to work in like a window and have all these Windows controls work. That's kind of its ethos. And the way it did that is essentially, as the loop went round, Ionian, the graphics engine, would say, "Hey Sojour, are you busy?" And then Sojour would reply back, "No, not busy right now, I'm at idle." And at that point, the graphics engine would say, "Okay, cool, I'll use your idle time to start rendering stuff," and that's how it worked. And it enabled the controls to get just enough CPU cycles and GPU cycles to do what they need to do. Plus, it gives the maps and all the other 3D graphics enough time to do their thing. So a very good engine. But the problem is, after I put in the new save system, I'd hit the save button, and it would take 6 minutes to save Sojour's data. And I thought, oh my god, what's going on there? Because, you know, my expectation in my head was, I've dumped everything onto a different CPU core, surely things are going to be faster. And I was a little bit stumped until I tried it again and accidentally waved my mouse over the map, and then it instantly saved. And at that point I knew exactly what the problem was. So what was actually going on was, it was saving and doing a whole bunch of stuff, but it was doing so on a different CPU core from what Sojour was actually running on. So when Ionian went to Sojour to ask it, are you busy? Although it was busy, it would say, no, I'm not busy. And that's because on its CPU core, it wasn't busy. And at that point, Ionian's going, great, I can go do stuff. And because this was happening continuously, because there is no work on the main core, everything on the computer suddenly gets focused on rendering the graphics. And that led to the saving and all the file stuff taking a lot longer, even though they're on a separate core. Well, once I realised that issue, I realised we're going to have to redo the pipeline to take all that into account. I've done that. I'm quite happy with the new rendering pipeline, although obviously I only have a limited number of machines here to test it on, but it seems to work great. And as a bonus, I managed to include a headless mode, which enables me to basically run Sojour as if it was displaying graphics, but without displaying graphics. And you might be thinking, what's the point of that? From a developer's perspective, it's great because it means that I can create automated tests that exercise the graphics engine and deploy those to Azure DevOps, the cloud. Because the downside to Azure DevOps, it doesn't have a graphics card. So if I was to attempt to do any kind of graphics tests, they would immediately throw an exception on the cloud simply because there's no graphics card to render things to. So that's a great feature. I guess other things I've added, so Sojour now remembers windows where you left them in a multi-monitor setup. In the past it wasn't very good at that. Now I'll caveat that by saying that the most monitors I own are 2 and I got it working perfectly with 2, so I'm hoping it's going to work with more than 2, but it'll be up to you folks to get back to me and let me know how that went. Other changes, I'm sure you can remember we had 2, maybe 3 emergency fixes in 1.5, and they were all related to these character bars because I did quite a lot of work on them to improve them. It's just that part of Sojour was quite complex and some bugs snuck through basically. So I created, I think there's 47 integration tests for those, and they're automatic, they just run whenever I build. And those tests actually found, I think, 3 or 4 additional bugs. They're extreme corner cases, I have to say, which is why probably no one's found them yet. But they were bugs nevertheless, and those have been fixed as well. So I guess those are the 2 main things you'll see. There is one other thing that got included with Sojour, and that is logging. It now logs stuff. And it creates 2 logs if I'm in development mode, a normal log and a developer's log, which contains a lot more information. Now obviously you folks aren't running it in developer's mode, so you'll get just a normal log, and it's called sojour.log. I got a version here, and you'll find that under app data, local Sojour logs. I think it's under there. Generally speaking, you don't need to look at it. And now, if Sojour crashes, heaven forbid, not only do you get the option of sending me the exception information, but it will also include all of the logs for that day as well, which is great. And it's in English as well, so the advantage of that is that if there's any private information in there you don't want to share with me, great, you just delete those relevant lines. So let me take you through a log, and in that way you can actually see some of the concepts we explained earlier actually working. Now this was run on my laptop, and my laptop does have OneDrive set up on it. So as you see, Sojour started. First thing is the file sync detectors get some configuration, and that's the eye on the diagram. That's the bit that monitors what's going on in the folder. And one thing it does, it adds various prefixes to the exemption list. So any file that has one of these prefixes, it never has a job raised for it, basically. So that is another change, actually. With the version you have, critical files, where Sojour always leaves a previous version behind, always, and that used to stay with the original files. And the idea being that if your files ever got corrupted, you could always rename the previous one to the current one, and things should be great. Now with this system, Sojour does not move these from local to your data directory, so you'll find these under your local folder instead. It's all in the manual, so don't worry about that. So you can see the detector's added a bunch of exemptions. It's then set up where its local storage is and also what it's going to be writing to. In this case, it's OneDrive, the cloud. So I thought you might as well test it on a cloud system just to make sure. And then it starts up the sync worker. So that's the little circular bit on the diagram. That's the bit that takes things off of the queue and works on them. Now occasionally these things, so it does what's called a pre-load file sync. And I'll show you that later on. So imagine a scenario where a whole bunch of stuff got saved into your local directory but never had the opportunity to be copied to your actual data directory, and then you shut Sojour down. So what Sojour does, whenever you load it, it looks at your local directory and performs this preload file sync, and what it's basically saying is, do you have any outstanding files that need to be copied to the data directory? And if you do, it will spend up to 4 minutes getting them all synchronized. So it's going to force that synchronization. And like I say, you could be waiting 4 minutes. However, in my experience, the most I've ever seen it takes about 3 seconds, so it's relatively quick. And the idea there is to ensure that whatever is in your data directory is up to date. Because if it didn't do that, you'd end up loading out-of-date information. So that's that bit, and I think there's some entries further down where it's actually doing this. Next thing that's happening is Sojour's updating everything, all the data. So I don't know if people are aware, but Sojour's internal data structures have changed quite markedly over the various versions, and it's transparent to the user because Sojour internally looks at the data that's coming in and then automatically updates it to the latest version. And that's why with Sojour you can load a game from Sojour version 1 in this very latest version, it still works. And that's because Sojour's dynamically in the background updating it. So here it's examined the data and has gone, well, updates 1 to 9 have already been applied, so it skips that. But it has found that update 10 hasn't been run yet. So one of the first things Sojour does before it changes or updates your data is it always performs backup. And all that backup is essentially, it takes your entire data folder, copies it, and puts a copy somewhere safe. And the reason why I do that is because I'm terrified of my updating system damaging your data, because I know some people's games can sometimes take years, and the last thing I want to do is damage those and provide you no way of getting that back. So Sojour does this backup. After the backup's done, it then runs the update, and then once that's done, it updates the internal version number basically to say we're now internally up to 10 in terms of data, and that happens automatically. Now in terms of these backups, if Sojour's working for you after it's run all this, you're free to delete these. You don't need to keep them. They're just there as a safety feature basically. So you can see Sojour's doing a whole bunch of other things here. This is where it gets interesting. In typical cloud style, things start exploding. So you can see here it's been trying to do stuff Attempt 1 for that goes up to attempt 2, 3, and I think it goes all the way up to attempt 6, and ultimately like here. And then after the 6 attempts, if it still failed, as I discussed earlier, it then requeues it to try that later on. In this case, OneDrive was absolutely going for it. You can see a whole bunch of these unauthorized access exceptions. And it's weird because, well, it's not weird. In the version you have, 1.5 and earlier, these unauthorized access exceptions would have taken Sojour down. You'd ended up with a crash, and then you'd be emailing me say, hey Rob, your system's not very good, it keeps crashing, and it's this that was causing it. But with this system, it doesn't bat an eyelid. I mean, it looks like it's busy here, but when I was actually using Sojour, I didn't know any of this was happening. It was only after I looked at the logs. In this case, I actually shut down Sojour before it had a chance to actually sync things, because everything was failing basically. And this is where we get to see the synchronization mechanism. So I then decided to start it up again, and what you can see is the preload file sync has started, and it's immediately found all the stuff from up here that never made it across, and then it immediately forces synchronization of that across to OneDrive, and this time it succeeds. Now again, this whole preload, it's got a timeout on it, so it's obviously got retries and everything else, just like the rest of the system, but I limit it to 4 minutes, otherwise, you know, you could be in an infinite loop. And then after 4 minutes, if it still hasn't managed to synchronize things, you get a little dialog pop up, and I'll show you that dialog later on when we get to the manual. So as you can see, it's really robust, and I say, from my perspective, I didn't know any of this was happening. Sojour just worked, and that's exactly what you want. So despite all these errors from OneDrive earlier on, it didn't make any difference. Sojour just worked. So it shows you how robust this system is, and you can see on this second loading that new update 10 had already been applied. So yeah, it's really good, and there's a lot of useful information in here, obviously, and that is at least the current day's worth is potentially sent to me, and I'll show you that when we get onto the manual. So I think with the addition of this, Sojour's kind of come of age, so it's now got a pretty enterprise level filing system, way more than it was, and it has enterprise level logging as well, just to go hand in hand with that, so it's all pretty good. So I'm just going to have a look at the manual just to show you some bits and bobs, just so you know where to find things. So the manual's obviously been updated, so you get a nice little diagram talking about Sojour's brand new filing system. Now on the right are some of the windows that you'll now see. So there's the synchronizing data one, so that preload, or at any other point whenever Sojour's trying to synchronize information from local to your main folder, you'll get a little synchronizing data window turn up. And as I say, for preload, the most I've ever seen that take is around 3 seconds. It's pretty quick. However, if after 4 minutes it still hasn't done it, and there could be numerous reasons for that. Maybe the cloud's being a particular pain at that point and just locking up everything forever. It's conceivable you can reach 4 minutes with this synchronizing data window up, and then after 4 minutes it just stops trying, and you get this window turn up. And what the window is basically saying is there are unsynced files which Sojour cannot sync your data directory. Please make sure the drive hosting your saved data is available, because it might not be, and it gives you the opportunity to have a look at your cloud drive, find out what's going on there, and then get given a choice. You can either continue with the data that's currently in your data folder as opposed to local stuff, and if you do, the chances are you're going to lose your latest stuff because this is going to start taking precedent. So my recommendation is you don't continue, you hit no and close Sojour down, and then have a look at your drive to see if it's available. In fact, this dialog window defaults to no. The only reason I give you that yes ability is just to give you a little bit of flexibility, that's all. Because you might decide, yeah, I'm happy to go back a few hours in order to be able to play, even though the cloud drive is causing problems. Now, in terms of this window, I've never seen it personally. I've had to put special code into Sojour to make that appear for testing purposes, so it's not something I'd expect any of you to see anyway. I guess the final change is around the error dialogues that you see if Sojour crashes, which should hopefully not be as often now. And there are actually two of them. There's always been two of them. There's a standard one and one that happens during loading, which offers you the ability to restore from backup. So the big difference now is not only do you get the exception information, but it adds on the logs from that I just showed you earlier. The only difference is it only gives you the logs for that day, basically. And when you copy it to clipboard or you send an email, you'll see all that laid out before you in the email. So if there's any personal information in there, you can just delete the relevant lines if you wish. And talking about logs, I think it's important to note they're rolling logs, so they never grow too big. So once they reach their maximum size, Sojour will delete the very earliest entries and then add the very latest entries onto the end. So these logs never continue expanding. So that's something that's worth bearing in mind. So that's it. Like I say, for me it was a big job. I think 161 files were changed or added. That's a lot of files, and it's followed by about 2 weeks of testing. Speaking of which, as a solo developer, I'm limited in the machines I have. I have, two machines. One's a laptop, one's a main machine, and I have various monitors and things that I can use, and various network drives I can try the system out. And for me, it works. However, as you saw from the diagram, it is quite complex, and there is a chance that someone's configuration might upset this. So be patient with me. This is basically the very first iteration of this new system. If you run into problems, just email me using the email at the front of the manual and we'll get it sorted out, basically. But hopefully no one's going to run into any problems. Cross his fingers. So that's it. Do all the usual YouTubey things, like, subscribe and all that kind of thing. And I'll see you for the next one. Thank you and goodbye.